What is good, all you cool cats and kittens? Your Commissioner Tim back at you for the Week 4 recap, Week 5 previews, and live from Chicago. I'm happy to catch the games this week and next week at regular hours for the first time this season. So as I'll be stateside, I've been having to catch a lot of the games at 2 a.m. in the morning in Korea. It's been tough to stay up, and the entire week's been pretty tough since the football season started. But I'm dedicated, so I'm going to keep watching it. Um, but with that said, let's kick it off right away with match 4 recaps. So starting off matchup number 1, we have Full Jerry going up to 2 shots no cup. Full Jerry on the week that he starts his rebuild, gets his win, puts up a respectable, very respectable 149, almost 150 points, good for second in the league. Uh, John John's now finally in the winning column, and congratulations to everyone. We finally have everyone in at least with one win. There are no lossless teams anymore or winless teams anymore. But yeah, Derrick Henry really showed up. I think off the backs of David Henry, Travis Kelsey actually putting up his first double figure week for the first time, and his ever trusted Amon-Ra St. Brown putting up 17 points for the week. Um, Other than that, I think John. I'm really curious to see what John does if he's going to continue his rebuild or not. I think he's certainly a lock for the playoffs if he starts to keep at it, especially putting up the win this week. He's 2 games out, but his roster is very strong. So we'll see what happens. I think certainly going to be some movements for us to keep at monitoring for the rest of the season. Now, moving over to Eve, who put up about 80 points, good for ninth in the league. Obviously, didn't have a good week, but he's got to be thrilled with how Jaden Daniels is doing. Jaden Daniels is actually the QB1 for the season, and he's getting it done both on the ground and in the air as well. If you take his week 2 performance out, which was 13 points, the kid's averaging 26 points. He scored no less than 24, which was his week 4 output here. So Jaden Daniels looks tremendously good. I think Eve's got to be thrilled that Jaden Daniels landed on his lap after Kevin picked Caleb went 1, and then Kevin picked up Marvin Harrison with the second pick. Jaden Daniels right now on keep trade cut. He is the QB2, I believe, or he might be the QB1. We'll visit that in a little bit in a later section. And with Andy Dalton's pickup, I think he's just been putting up these respectable scores. And the other player that I'll mention for him is Trey Tucker. I think he put up a note saying another legendary pickup by a legendary manager. He's referring to Cordero Patterson's pickup in 2021. I think Trey Tucker is certainly going to get a lot of looks. And in a week, Devontae Adams was not playing, and he's not going to be playing this week. And he's probably going to get traded to the Jets or somewhere else. Kid had 6 targets, put up a tutty on a carry, which was designed for him, and put up almost 13 points. So I think Trey Tucker will certainly be an asset to look at, and I think it's going to be going up this season as well. All right, moving over to the next matchup, we have Moncton Meerkats moving up to perfect 4-0 against Huge Dicka. I mean, this was a really respectable matchup. Huge Dicka is obviously putting up the 4th largest at 130. I believe it's its season high. Moncton Meerkats obviously runs away with it, putting up the league high at 157. But talking about Huge Dicka a little bit, Jordan Love comes back, puts up 28 points in a week where he miraculously almost had a near comeback victory. I think he was down 28-0, and then lost by 2 points, 31-29. But all of that production coming in the second half. Jordan Love going off. Now, on talking about Travis, I think Travis has got to be excited about what Chase Brown is doing and the number of touches that he's getting over Zach Moss in the start of the season. Chase Brown looks like a stud. Put up a 20-point week on his bench. And Travis is now sitting at 2-2, and he's got a good rest of the matchups coming up. And I think you'll see in the power rankings, Travis with this kind of output obviously gets a loss here, but it's a solid roster that he put together. Moving over to Kyle. Now, I mean, off the backs of Lamar, who's just been playing incredibly well this season, and Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed puts up 23 points. He is the wide receiver 4 for the season. And if you think about the splits of Jordan Love playing, which was week 1 and week 4, and without Jordan Love, which was week 2 and week 3. The kid's averaging 17 points for the season at large, but with Jordan Love in week 1 and week 4, he's put up the wide receiver 1, 31 points in week 1, wide receiver 2, which was 23.6, which is this week in week 4. He's averaging 27 points with Jordan Love. Um, he looks like the bona fide wide receiver 1 for Jordan Love there. So we'll see how this works out. But if Jaden Reed ends up really, really doing well, I think Kyle's going to be a tremendous contender for the Cup this season. Um, and he's got a really deep and secure quarterback rotation as well. Um, and we'll see what happens. But with Saquon and Kyron Williams as what I think running back 2 and running back 4 for the season as well, I think Kyle's got to be feeling really, really good about how his season is kicking off. All right, so Kyle stays at a perfect 4-0, and Huge Sticka drops to 2-2. Moving over to Kevin versus Mr. Ambassador. This was the matchup that I picked as the commissioner's pick of the week, solely for the impact of what it would mean for the playoffs at large for both of these managers. Now, Mr. Ambassador had a chance to go to 2-2, but Kevin certainly having a chance to go up to 3-1, which he does here, certainly puts him in a really formidable spot to be able to sneak into the playoffs this season. Now, I was calling it last week that if there is a sneak in for the playoffs, for this season, the manager, one of them who does sneak in, is going to be one of these managers. Um, Kevin, if you look at his roster, and by the way, I wrote an analysis to all this and put in my speaker notes. And as soon as I got the recording, every single speaker note just disappeared. So an hour and a half of me writing, it's just disappeared. So I'm trying to remember as much of what I wrote as I go through slide by slide. So excuse my, off the cuff sort of rambling on here, but on Kevin, if you really look at his roster, uh, there has been tremendous outputs for Kevin. And yes, he doesn't have the highest points for, even though he sits at 3-1. But I think this is actually a sign for, there's a sign here for Kevin to really sustain this type of an output. He's very close. Jordan Mason, he's going to be able to perform these running back 1 type of numbers for as long as CMC is out. And, every week new news on CMC looks like he's not going to be coming back, or it's getting more severe with now both of his Achilles having tendonitis. And Jordan Love is going to continue to put up these numbers. He's RB5 for the season, averaging almost 18 points a week, put up 23 this week. Marvin Harrison's playing well. And if you look at Chuba Hubbard, he is right now putting up 14 points a week, good enough for RB5, RB15. But if you look at the weeks since Andy Dalton's been playing, week 3 and week 4, Chuba Hubbard put up RB5 numbers, putting up 25 points in week 3, and he put up RB7 numbers, putting up 20 points this week. So Chuba looks like he's certainly got the entire backfield there. He had 22 touches this week in week 4. And on top of that, Jordan Addison is back and healthy. So with both of them performing, I really feel like Kevin is probably a QB1 away because Jared Goff is playing well. Anthony Richardson's probably the big disappointing spot for him. But I think there's a chance here that we really see some movements for Kevin to strengthen up. And if Kevin comes into the playoffs having figured out the QB1 position, whether it's Anthony Richardson figuring out, or he makes a trade or whatever it may be, there's a chance that Kevin really is one of those tier below the contender tier, even as early as this season. And so it's really great to see an expansion team manager really, really getting into the marks quickly here. One last note is going to be on Ricky Dowdle. So he's been picking up his snap share every single week his snap share as well as his touches and opportunities every week has been increasing as well. And it looks like he's going to be taking majority of the backfield now, with Deuce Vaughn and Zeke Elliott sort of dropping over the last 3 weeks. So that's another really quality running back who's young that's on Kevin's roster. So I'm excited to see what Kevin does. Moving up 3-1, you'll see the impact of what this means from a needle moving standpoint over on the power rankings coming up. Moving over to Mr. Ambassador, what a disappointing week for our boy Sergey here, putting up 54 points, good for worst in the league. But also the disappointing injury to Rishi Rice, who's probably going to be out for the rest of the season. I know there was news today that came up regarding he's going to get second opinion, which in one hand might look like he's maybe not torn an ACL, maybe there's a chance to come back. But some other reports are saying it could be that it just because of the swelling, it could be that image didn't come out close, so he just needs to get a second look. So until the news comes out, I mean that injury looked pretty brutal from the hit from Mahomes. But that said, I think that impact alone isn't going to be as severe because he's also got Xavier Worthy, who's probably going to be able to hopefully increase some of his opportunities with Rasheed Rice being out, even though they're not really the same players. That said, his other players in Ramondre Stevenson and Zamir White both look like they're about to lose their starting roles to their backups. In fact, I think it was announced that both of them are going to be losing the starting roles as well. So I think this season is pretty tough for him, especially with Christian Watson. High ankle sprain looks like he's going to be out for a long time. I know he just avoided the IR, but high ankle sprains you just don't look normal for several weeks, even if you're able to come back. So I think this year is going to be another sort of rebuilding year for Sergey. But that said, his future is bright. He's got 6 first round picks over the next 2 seasons, and Sergey certainly picks well, so or drafts well. So I'm excited to sort of see what kind of moves Sergey does for the rest of the season. Moving over to Brady Stir Dynasty against Wooksy Fingerhold. Brady moves up 3-1. Wooksy Fingerhold drops. This is third loss, 1-3. Really settling into the tiers that both the teams are doing. I'll talk about Brad because there's a lot of stuff that I want to talk about with Brady Stir Dynasty. But regarding Brad, I think, we know it's a rebuilding team, expansion team, and everything like that. Caleb Williams obviously had a great week 3, sort of went back a little bit down on week 4, just 11 points from fantasy standpoint. But he also didn't really have a lot of opportunities to throw. It was only 23 pass attempts. So in the win against the Rams. So I think, I feel good about Caleb. Now, is he going to be as good as Jaden Daniels? I don't know. But certainly Caleb is going to be able to put up a little bit more on the high end outputs than what he's displayed to start the season. That said, I think he's got to be excited about what Brian Thomas has been doing for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know that entire offense looks pretty cruddy, and who knows what happens if the GM or the coach is safe. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence has been paid the bag, so he's going to be there for a while, and hopefully he's going to be able to figure it out. But Brian Thomas looks good, and I think he is the wide receiver 1 over Christian Kirk, even though Christian Kirk had a good week this week. So he's got a good one there. And mind you, Bucky Irving looks like he's about to take the starting role over Rashad White. They have the same touches, but last week, but Bucky Irving's been steadily increasing his touches and opportunities on a week to week basis since the start of this week. And Bucky just looks like a much better running back. He put up a respectable, solid 12 points. By the way, Brad, I got to be excited about what Brad's been able to do. Bucky Irving was a 4th round pick this year, so he's getting some tremendous value from another 4th round draft pick. Remember who his 4th round draft pick was last year? It was Puka Nacua. So, I mean, with that type of return on your 4th round pick, I feel like I need to start stacking up on some 4th round picks for the rest of the season as well. Moving over to Ryan, the third highest output moves up to 3-1, so tied for second here. But if you look at Bracer Dynasty's roster, there's some, obviously, he's playing incredibly well off the backs of CJ Stroud, Alvin Kamara having a revitalization year, Nico Collins obviously going off as the wide receiver 1 for CJ Stroud. Gotta love that stack between CJ and Nico. Aaron Jones playing well for the Vikings as well. And then Kenneth Walker came back from the injury, put up a 3 tutty score, RB2 figures at 31.6, just behind King Henry's almost 200 yard on the ground sort of output there. But if you look at all the names that are performing incredibly well for Ryan this season, CD Stroud, Devin Achan, Alvin Kamara, Nico Collins, Aaron Jones, and even Chris Godwin, and even names that maybe aren't performing as well right now, but you obviously have high expectations for, and Brandon Ayuk. The only name I didn't mention there is Deshaun Watson, who's obviously not playing well, and Jamar Chase, who obviously is going to ramp it up as the offense for the Cincinnati Bengals ramp up. But every single player that I just mentioned, so minus a tight end who's just no tight ends are doing well this year, But of the starting, I think we start 10. Yeah, of the 10, I just named seven. Uh, those are all players that he's traded for in the last 18 months. So a season and a half. I think some of them were 2 years ago. So Ryan's doing a tremendous job of continuing to make these really savvy trades that really are allowing him to not just rebuild, but just continue to keep his dynasty window open and just continue to move him in. I think Ryan, if you look at, he's right now just a QB2 away from running away in the league in points for. He's already the top scoring in points for the season. It's close between Kyle, myself, and Ryan. But if Ryan can address his QB2 position, which right now is being filled with Deshaun Watson, who's only averaging about 14 points a week, I think he's really got a chance to run away into his own tier, in terms of points for. And this is, by the way, everything that he's accomplishing right now, Ryan, he's doing it with one less roster spot than the rest of the league because he refuses to drop Tom Brady. All right, moving over to last week's commissioner pick of the week in terms of matchup. We have Bills Mafia against Trusted Process. Bills Mafia moves up to 2-2 off of a really disappointing week for myself. Talking about Brandon, Brandon gets a win here, but I think he's got to be pretty frustrated with what's going on with Bijan Robinson. He started the season getting off a lot of touches, and then Tyler Algier started to look like Arthur Smith's backfield all over again. And Tyler Algier actually had one more carry than Bijan did last week in the win against the Saints. But I think Bijan's certainly a very talented running back, but that's got to be a thorn in his ass. And Garrett Wilson also not necessarily having the breakout season that we were all expecting out of him amidst all the trade rumors of Devontae Adams. Now Raiders looking to trade him for a second, and plus, if he ends up coming over to the Jets, you got to figure that's going to be affecting Garrett Wilson's output even more. So we'll see what happens this season. And the one stat that I'll mention is Patrick Mahomes is right now QB 16 for this season as well. So off of the really inconsistent play from Jalen Hurts, who's only putting up 18 points for the season per week right now as well. So really, his roster is filled with high expectation players who are really underperforming to start the season. And there's certainly a chance that a lot of those players end up coming back to their forms average of what they experienced last season. But until we start to see that, we're going to continue to see Bills Mafia's points for reflecting in a separate category that's a tier below the contender tier. Now moving over to trust process, my team, if I'm only going to get 32 points or 20 points between Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Brees Hall, and I'll just include Kyle Pitts in there because he had a donut. I'm not going to be winning a lot of weeks, but not really worried. I think I was really happy to see Justin Fields hopefully solidifying his starting position, scoring 32 points for last week, and DeAndre Swift looking like he's not fully washed. So it buys me a couple of weeks to sort of see what happens with this kid. But I think those players, hopefully this is going to be an anomaly for a week for me. And it makes sense and so fitting that after 3 straight weeks of the season and me mentioning in last week's video that I haven't had a week below 140 yet, here I am, not even to crack 110. But that does it for the matchups from week 4. There were some storylines and there are some notable things that I wanted to highlight of what we saw in the league and what we saw. And I mentioned a little bit during the matchup sections, but we'll move over to the notables and storylines here. I wanted to showcase this. I'm going to do this every single week, but I wanted to do this now that we're week 5, heading into week 5. I want to show like the keep, trade, cut movers and shakers. So this is a section that they show for dynasty rankings, which shows the last 30 days of changes, and the season rankings, which is the output of this season in a redraft format of what you're seeing over the last week. So starting with the dynasty rankings, we have Malik Neighbors, who is right now 4th dynasty asset overall, meaning he's up 19 to the wide receiver 2 spot. It's owned by myself. Jaden Daniels is the 3rd right now, the biggest dynasty asset, up 21 spots overall. QB2, only behind Josh Allen. That's owned by our boy Eve. Andy Dalton, also owned by Eve. He's 194, up 356 to the QB 34 position. So that's really, really great to see. And Nico Collins, as I mentioned, he's 12 right now. He's up 23. Wide receiver 7, owned by Ryan. Brock Bowers up 25 to the 22nd. Tight end 1, owned by Mr. Ambassador. So 3 of those assets are rookie draft picks from this past season. And I think this is what I love about Dynasty. You get a pick right, this really sets your franchise up, your team up in a completely different direction. Uh, Man, Jaden Daniels was a get for our boy Eves. Now, on the other side of the table, obviously some of these are injury. Actually, most of these are going to be injury related. But you got the first two, Tua and Christian McCaffrey. Tua's down 72 spots now, QB 25. I think a lot of that is not necessarily coming from what people are thinking from, where Tua is. I don't think anyone would think Tua's a QB 25 from a value standpoint, but certainly the uncertainty associated with longevity, which is a big factor to dynasty rankings and value. I think it's really pushing him down to the QB 25 spot. But looks like Tua's going to be back after the bye week. So I think this is going to be a boon for Wooksy Fingerhold. Christian McCaffrey now is RB10, dropped quite a bit. And I think it makes sense. You got the age, you got, worse news compounding after another week after week. And we got Mark Andrews down 95 spots to 165, tight end 16. There's no value for someone that's, valued at anything worse than a tight end 10 or tight end 8 really in dynasty fantasy. I don't know what happened to Mark Andrews, but it came out of nowhere. Although that said, there was a comment by I think John Harbaugh where he did mention to the press that expect there's going to be a lot of passing games, passing contributions and performances by Mark Andrews this season. So we'll see what happens and the impacts there. Uh, but Brandon's got 2 of the biggest fallers in Dynasty to start off the season in him and Patrick Mahomes, as I mentioned. Obviously, the QB1 and the Dynasty 1 heading into the season, down 10 overall, now QB5. I think that's fascinating to see. Um, One thing I wanted to point out here, Bryce Young obviously drops quite a bit, down 100. I've mentioned a few things about it. We all have feelings about what he is, but he's QB 32 right now in Dynasty, just 2 more than the 36-year-old, 37, whatever Andy Dalton is, who's now a QB 34, which is incredible. Obviously, keep trade cut, overreactions, everything. It's a huge thing, but looking over the last 30 days, I think it was a good indicator of sort of at least looking at the last month as a whole. I'm not going into the details of the season rankings as because I think that matters a little less to us. But certainly, if you see on the season rankings, the top 5 riser from a redraft standpoint, you got our boy Ryan with 2 names of the biggest risers in Brandon Ayuk and Chris Godwin here. And obviously Jaden Daniels there and Chuba Hubbard, as I mentioned earlier. Fallers wise, there's not necessarily, I don't think there's a single repeat here, but the tight ends. Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, the young tight ends, I think are all having very disappointing seasons here to start the season. Now, in terms of the storylines, there was a few things I want to point out. Moving over to the first thing, is Sonny rebuilding? Is that going to be started? We had the first trade with Devontae Adams going out. What does it mean, especially in a week where he puts up almost 140 points, certainly his season high? I'm excited to see what happens for the rest of the league. There's certainly going to be buyers. Folks like Brandon, who's starting off slow, positions of need that John has, that a lot of folks in the peripheries or that middle ground are going to be more than excited to pick up, including any of the contenders as well. Certainly got a lot of assets, and I'm really excited to see what this means from a movement standpoint. We're still early in the season enough that anyone can potentially make moves to be a formidable playoff contender. And then the other big storyline was the Rashee Rice ACL injury. Who knows what happens? Obviously, there was news that I mentioned, but likely he's going to be a torn ACL with how it looks. But such an unfortunate injury. Man, I had Rashee Rice as Dynasty 6 with how dominant he looked to start his sophomore season. He was my favorite sophomore receiver, and I hope the young man comes back healthy next season. That said, it's early enough in the season that you'd hope he'd be fine for training camp and preseason workouts next season. Uh, the impact here to Mahomes, I don't know what happens. I mean, he's already without really a lot of weapons. Does this mean that he's going back to Kelsey and the things that's working? Rashee Rice was actually running a lot of the routes that Travis Kelsey was doing last season, except Rashee Rice is a better version of Travis Kelsey in terms of the routes that they're running than Travis Kelsey at this point in his career. But that said, I think it's going to be a boon to Travis because Travis Kelsey is going to be taking one-to-one snaps in the routes that Rishi Rice was running. So um, last week was an indicator. Travis Kelsey, for the first time, led the Chiefs in receptions and yards. Kelsey had 89 yards on 7 receptions. That's more than doubling his season output to date, coming with 8 catches and 69 yards combined through the first 3 weeks. So I think this is going to be a boon again. Sonny's got Travis Kelsey, so it's another impact here. So I think there's going to be a lot of movements for Sonny to actually stay and potentially make the playoffs, or trade those pieces away as rising assets that I think there's going to be plenty of buyers for. Next point I want to mention is King Henry is still the king, man. I know half the league is in conversation with John regarding a lot of his players right now, but regarding King Henry, he led the fantasy, all fantasy at 34 points this week. Came up 1 yard short of getting his career seventh 200-yard rushing game, and that would have set him up for NFL's most 200-yard games all time. Man, with how he's looking next to Lamar, I would not be surprised if he sets that NFL record sometime this season. And the last point is, who's actually legit in NFL? Like how quickly the narratives change. To start the season, you look at the Jets, Rodgers, and how he played in Thursday Night Football last week or 2 weeks ago to how he looked against the Denver game. And maybe Denver defense is just elite. The Steeler curtain looks like it's been exposed. The Vikings were very scoreable in the second half against the Packers. Bills got demolished. So when it comes to sort of the defense at large, it looks like Denver D is the only one that has yet to been broken. But we'll see how the rest of the league ends up sort of equaling out. But certainly, I think a lot of things are too early to be safe. But this looks like another season like last year, where you had a lot of these expectations of teams coming in who are going to be the Super Bowl favorites. That didn't really forge until really, really late in the season. Maybe it's going to be another case this year as well, because you certainly got the undefeated teams who are looking shaky, like this KC in specific, and Vikings, how they played against the Packers in the second half last year, to a lot of sort of the 3-1 teams that a lot of them probably shouldn't be there. So we'll see what happens. But moving over to the previews for week 5. The first matchup, we got Full Jerry against Wooksy Fingerhold. Sleepers got this at 58% against John at 42, largely because Full Jerry's got a roster full of buys this week, and he hasn't placed it with actual starters who are playing next week. But that said, I think Sleeper's probably going to end up having Full Jerry as a favorite here, and I'm going to stick with Full Jerry moving up to 2-3 here. Next matchup, we got Bracer Dynasty against Two Shots No Cup. I think it's pretty simple. Sleeper's got the 74% going Ryan's way, and I'm going to stick with it. Third matchup, we got Kevin against Bills Mafia. 3-1 Kevin against 2-2 Bills Mafia. Bills Mafia gets this 65%. I'm not going to argue. I think Bills Mafia moves up with the second straight win, going 3-2 here. Kevin drops to 3-2. The fourth matchup, Moncton Meerkats against Mr. Ambassador. Sleeper's got this 63%, and I've got this going over to Moncton Meerkats as well. I think Sergey is just going to be dealing with way too many injuries and unfortunate situations for him. So I got Moncton Meerkats rolling for another hot season start, like he did the year before. He's going to be moving into 5-0. All right, I got this one as the commissioner pick of the week. I don't think there's really a lot of that important matchups per se, but this was the only one with real playoff implications. 2-2 Trusted Process against 2-2 Huge Dicka. I think the implications is if Huge Dicka is able to pull this off, it's going to be a huge get for him in terms of how he looks come playoff push. And moving to 3-2 is certainly going to be making a good sort of needle move for his ability to make the playoffs. Sleeper's got this 60% going my way. I'm going to stick with it. I think Trusted Process bounces back, moves out to 3-2. All right, so that brings us to our week 4 power rankings. Heading into week 5, got some movements here. At the top, I'm keeping Moncton Meerkats. Braister Dynasty moves up a spot, going to 3-1. Trusted Process drops. And then I swapped Kevin and Fulgeri at 6 and 7. I wanted to point out the playoff odds, and this is the delta from last week. So the Huge Dicka now goes from 85 to 80% with the loss that he had. But Kevin, increases his percentage probability of making the playoffs, like I predicted last week. He moves it to 64%, up from 42. And full Jerry, even though he had to win here, but because Kevin moves up to 3-1, and now full Jerry's a full 2 games behind the 6th seed, Jerry drops 7% to 56%, and Mr. Ambassador dropping to 1-3, especially with all these injuries. Fantasy Pros has his percentage dropping from 11 down to 1%. Yeah, I think Mr. Ambassador, Wooksy, and Two Shots really have no shot at making playoffs this season, with how the start of the season, plus Mr. Ambassador, who I would have thought has a chance out of this tier, but all the injuries that he's facing now. And Kevin moving up as a favorite between full Jerry and Kevin, and full Jerry in sort of rebuilding mode. If that's something that's going to be sticking, I think you're looking at Kevin's first season in the playoffs. All right, so that does it for our recap, previews, and some storylines and narratives that we saw in week 4. Good luck in week 5, boys. Enjoy Thursday night football tomorrow. We got Sunday and Monday. It's going to be a good one. I think we have a Saturday night game, if I'm not mistaken. So enjoy. I know this was a little long one because I was rambling on a little bit, and hopefully I'll figure out so that the speaker notes don't just disappear. Peace, boys.